Hey guys, it's Alex back here. So now that we have the ability to add new exercises to our database, let's also add the functionality to delete exercises. So I'm going to go to index.js and we already have a list component over here. And basically we include the list item as well as list item text. Well, let's head over to Material UI documentation. Okay, I'm going to open the docs for Material UI next. Let's click on Get Started and I'm going to look for the list component. So I'm going to click on lists. And if you remember, we used a very simple example over here, which basically just represents a list that has a list item with the text. That's exactly what we use, right? So if you scroll down, you're going to see a bit more sophisticated examples. So apart from just having the list item itself, you could also start adding icons. You could even add form controls like checkboxes or even avatars. If you expand this first example over here, you can see that apart from having just the list item text, we can also include what's known as list item secondary action. And inside of it, we can include an icon button with the actual icon. And then we can actually assign some kind of behavior to that button. So back in our application, let's add another element over here, and it's going to be list item secondary action. Okay, it's going to be a wrapping element, and of course we need to close it off like that. And then once we do include it, of course, we need to also import it. So I'm going to include it over there. And now would be a good time to adjust the placement of these imports. So I'm just going to put them on separate lines like that. And this will be the last one. Okay, this looks good. Now with that in place, we can actually put the icon button wrapper inside. So I'm going to place the icon button, and the icon button itself can be extracted from Material UI, of course, like that. And if you're not sure about the path, of course, you can always go back to the docs. If you scroll up, you're going to see the import statement that looks something like this. They import the icon button directly from Material UI. So that's exactly what we can do. And now that we have the icon button wrapper, we can actually go to the Style Icons section, and in here we can actually find information about the SVG material icons, which I talked about before. And if you click on the links that leads to the Google website, so the material design website, you could actually start searching for icons. So in this scenario, we're looking for the delete icon, like that. If we want to use that icon, the only thing that we need to do is we basically need to reference it. So let's do import delete. Make sure to keep it as camel case. And then we import it from Material UI icons, like that. So let's grab that icon and let's place it inside the icon button wrapper. So I'm just going to paste it in, fix the indentation, and if you save the file, you're going to see the icon appearing on the right side of the list item. And once we have that, we can actually assign an onClick event handler. And in this case, this would be a callback function. We can call the onDelete property, which we're going to extract from the props, passing the ID of the current exercise. Okay, and then we just simply add the onDelete at the end. And of course, this property does not exist at the moment, so we have to also pass it to the exercises like that, onDelete. Let's also create a method. We would call it this handle exercise delete. I'm going to copy the name of the method. This method is going to accept the ID of the exercise, and it's going to return a function, which in the end would simply do the following. We basically need to set the state, and then what we can do instead of set state, we can actually pass another callback function, which would return an object in the end. That's why I need to wrap it with parentheses. And that function is going to accept the previous state object from which we're going to extract the exercises. And then finally, we're going to set the exercises property itself. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to loop through the exercises with the filter method. We're going to accept an exercise, and we're basically just going to filter it down to those exercises that do not contain the current exercise. And because we have the ID, we already know which exercise needs to be excluded. So I'm just going to say when we're looping through the exercises and we get the exercise object, if the ID of that exercise object does not equal to the ID of the exercise that needs to be deleted, well, that means that that exercise needs to be excluded from the list. And once we save the file, let's try deleting the first one, overhead press. I click on delete, and then the exercise disappears. We can basically delete all of them. Now, the only thing, as you can see here, when you actually delete exercises, the category disappears as well. Now, that's not a problem if you add a new exercise, right? So if I were to add, let's say, a deadlift for our back category, and then we can put a description. When I click on create, of course, it's going to create the exercise and the category would be added back. Now, if you did want to keep the categories as they are, the one thing you could do is you could actually modify the get exercises by muscles method. So there's a few things we could do here. One of them would be to create the initial set of exercises. So we can take the muscles, right? The muscles are coming from the store, and the muscles here basically represent the categories that we have in our application. So these muscles are never going to change, so we can rely on them. So what we can do actually is we can create an object out of those muscles. So out of the muscles array, we can create an object that contains all those muscles with an empty array assigned to them, so that when you delete something from the muscles, you're not going to delete the property of the object, but you're actually going to leave out the empty array with that property. Now it's a bit confusing, but it's actually going to make sense. So let's create a constant here. I'm going to call it initial exercises, like that. And we're basically going to loop through the muscles. So I'm going to call the reduce method on it. And the reduce method is going to accept a callback, as always. And I think we're going to return an object. And what we're going to do is, the first one would be the accumulator, so the exercises. The second one, you can call it category, or you could also call it muscles. Basically, that's the muscles group, or the category. And then what we do in the end is we basically extract out the exercises, and then we also add a new property on the object. In fact, we're going to pass an empty object as the initial value for the reduce function, like that. And then we basically going to assign this an empty array. And I think I called it muscles, actually it needs to be category, of course. But you could also keep the argument name as muscles. It doesn't really make any difference, but I'm going to keep it as category. Now, this is confusing as hell, so what I'm going to do is, let's do console log init exercises. Let's actually console log out the muscles. So the muscles, you already know what the value is, right? Because it's coming from the store directly. So it's just going to be the list of all the categories. But what happens if you save that, and I'm going to open up the console, and you can already see the list of muscles, pretty much what you would expect, right? But if you expand the object over here, you're going to see an object that contains all of the categories. So all of those properties, all of those categories are basically cloned to the object as object properties. And then the assigned value is always an empty array. Now, if we do pass this initial exercises as the initial value instead of the empty object, when we do all this crazy transformation to get our object, our exercises object, if we pass that as an initial value and I save it, let's see what happens if I delete something. So let's say I want to delete bench press. Well, it's actually going to keep the chest category over there. And the reason it does that is because it's actually going to keep an empty array for that property on the state, on the exercises property of the state. And what's even better is that we don't need to have this condition over here, because we already know that the property already exists on the exercises object. So we can just simply assign this expression to it directly without the condition. This is going to extract all of the existing exercises, if there's any, because there could be a case in which you just have an empty array. So it's going to extract an empty array into it, and it's going to add the exercise. So if you save that, I'm going to refresh the application just in case. So let's try deleting something. That just basically keeps the category in the top. You're still going to see the title of the muscle group, and then you delete other stuff. Of course, as you expect, that's going to keep the categories back on the left pane. Right, so that's basically it for deleting exercises.